The first knock on this glass is sharp enough to slice through my sleep. For a second, I don't remember where I am. All I see is darkness, the fog of my own breath on the inside of the windshield, and the ache in my spine from another night curled in the back seat. Then the beam of a flashlight cuts across my face like a spotlight, and my heart slams into my ribs. The faded ceiling of my old Honda presses down on me. My legs are cramped, my feet are numb, and there's a uniform standing outside my window. "Ma'am, roll it down. Nice and slow." My fingers are stiff as I fumble for the switch. Cold air rushes in as the window cracks, bringing with it the smell of asphalt and stale fast food from the closed strip mall around me. It's just another parking lot, just another night. That's what I tell myself. Just a warning, just a ticket. The officer takes my license and registration without much expression, then walks back to his cruiser, red and blue washes pulsing over the dirty paint of my car. I've seen this routine before, but tonight, something is different. I watch him through the side mirror, see his shoulders tighten as he leans over his computer. He stops typing. His head tilts like he's reading something that doesn't make sense. His hand goes to his radio. His mouth moves, but I can't hear what he's saying. When he turns back toward me, the air in the car feels heavier. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle," he calls, voice tighter now. "Keep your hands where I can see them." I open the door, knees trembling as my boots hit the cold pavement. The night is so quiet it hums. The officer's flashlight stays on my chest. My breath comes in little clouds. "What's going on?" I manage. He swallows hard. "When I ran your license, a federal flag popped up on your file." He looks almost as shaken as I feel. "It's from 1999. Homeland Security wants your exact location." The parking lot tilts under my feet. The wind stings my eyes, and for a moment I can't tell if it's the cold or the panic making them water. Federal, Homeland Security, for a woman sleeping in her car. Before we go on, tell me where you're listening from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt overlooked by the people who should have cared for you. My name is Caroline Reed. I'm 38 years old, and 6 months before that night in the parking lot, I thought my life was boring in the best possible way. I lived in Denver, worked as a project manager at a mid-sized interior design firm, and rented a small one-bedroom apartment with creaky floors and a decent view of the mountains if you squinted just right. I wasn't rich, I wasn't fancy, but my bills were paid. My car ran, and my biggest worry was whether my clients wanted granite or quartz. If you'd asked my family, though, they'd tell you I was the one who never quite lived up to her potential. That was my mother's favorite phrase, usually delivered with a tight smile over holiday dinner. My mom, Diane, built an entire personality around pretending everything was perfect, right down to the way she arranged the napkins. My younger sister, Ashley, fit that picture like she'd been born for it. Successful realtor, big smile, perfect hair, always the center of attention. Then there was me, the steady one, the one who meant well, the one who worked hard at a job no one at the table understood or cared enough to ask about. Whenever conversation turned my way, Mom would pat my hand and say things like, "Caroline does office stuff. She's good with paperwork." I had a degree, managed million-dollar renovation timelines, and juggled contractors and clients for a living, but to them I was just office stuff. That's how it had always been. Growing up, if there was only one ticket to something special, Ashley got it. If there was praise to hand out, Mom made sure Ashley heard it first and loudest. I learned early on that my role was to be responsible, quiet, and grateful for whatever crumbs of affection rolled my way. The more invisible I became, the smoother family life ran. So I stayed small. I told myself it was easier that way. The irony was that I still kept showing up. Birthdays. Sunday dinners. 4th of July. Barbecues in my mother's manicured backyard. I was there, casserole in hand, hoping that maybe this time she'd see me. Maybe this time she'd ask how my week was and actually wait for the answer. Instead, she would compare my sensible shoes to Ashley's designer heels, or joke about how I never quite figured out how to land a man, while Ashley's husband Trent smirked into his beer. The first crack in my carefully balanced life came on an ordinary afternoon in April. I'd stopped by my mother's house on my lunch break to drop off some estate paperwork from when my dad passed. Dad had been the buffer between us, the one person who treated me like I mattered. When he died, that buffer went with him. Mom opened the door, looked me up and down like I was a UPS package, and sighed. "Caroline, I'm in the middle of something. This will only take a second," I said, holding up the folder. "The probate office needs your signature on these forms." She didn't invite me in. She never did not, unless Ashley was already there. She just reached for the pen I was holding, scribbled her name without reading a word, and shoved the papers back at me. 38 and still needing your mother's help with paperwork," she muttered. "Some people never grow up." It stung, but that was nothing new. I swallowed the hurt and forced a smile like I always did. "Thanks, Mom. Try not to make things more complicated than they already are," she added, already closing the door. "Ashley and Trent have enough on their plates. Not everyone can carry you forever, Caroline." The door clicked shut, and I stood on her porch staring at the wreath she'd hung for spring. It was perfect, of course, not a petal out of place. 2 days later, my credit card was declined at the grocery store. I remember the exact sound the register made, a little electronic chirp, polite, but final. The cashier tried again. Same chirp. The line behind me shuffled and sighed. My face burned hot while my stomach dropped cold. I knew the balance had been paid. I'd scheduled it myself. "Maybe call the number on the back," the cashier suggested, trying to be kind as she set my bagged groceries aside. By the time I got to my car and pulled up my banking app, my hands were shaking. There were charges I didn't recognize: expensive dinners, electronics, online orders, all in the last few months. When the bank confirmed that 2 additional cards had been opened in my name and linked to an address in a suburb where I didn't live, my mouth went dry. The address was in the same neighborhood as Ashley's new house. I drove there on autopilot, the way my car seemed to know the turns by itself. When I walked in through her unlocked front door, Ashley and Trent were sitting at the kitchen island like they were waiting for a commercial break. My heart was pounding, my voice barely holding steady, as I asked why my name and social security number were all over their credit applications. Ashley didn't even flinch. "It was just temporary," she said, waving her hand like she was brushing away a fly. "Relax, Care. You weren't using your credit anyway." By the time Trent leaned back in his chair, smirk firmly in place, and said, "What's the big deal? You act like we stole something," I felt the world tilt in a way that had nothing to do with the floor. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just overlooked in my family. I was expendable, and I had no idea yet just how far they were willing to go to prove it. I was 8 years old the night my mother told me to step out of the family Christmas photo. The living room glowed with warm lights, the tree glittered like something out of a magazine, and Ashley, 5, dimpled perfect, twirled in the red velvet dress Mom had pressed earlier that afternoon. I stood beside her in my hand-me-down sweater, tugging at the frayed cuff, hoping I looked nice enough. When Dad lifted the camera, I moved closer, eager to be part of the picture. And then Mom's hand landed on my shoulder, firm and cold. "Sweetheart, let's have one of Ashley by herself first," she said, voice bright but eyes sharp. "You can join the next one." But there wasn't a next one. They snapped picture after picture. Ashley by the fireplace, Ashley with her stocking, Ashley with Mom and Dad. I hovered at the edge of the room, smiling when Dad glanced my way, pretending I didn't care that my place kept shrinking until it disappeared entirely. When the camera finally clicked off, my mother patted my head like I was the family dog. "Maybe next year we'll get you something nicer to wear," she said. I remember the taste in my mouth, metallic, embarrassed, too old for 8 years old. I remember swallowing so hard it hurt, telling myself it didn't matter. Telling myself Ashley just looked cuter. Telling myself that maybe if I stood straighter next year or smiled better or didn't tug at my sleeve, I could earn a spot in the frame. I told myself anything that kept the sting from showing on my face. And God help me, a part of me still remembers that moment every time someone lifts a camera. The memory dissolves the way it always does, quietly at first, then all at once, like letting go of a breath I didn't know I was holding. And just like that, I'm back in my present life in the aftermath of Ashley's casual cruelty over those credit cards, realizing that what happened in that kitchen wasn't an accident. It was a continuation. It was history repeating itself. Growing up, I learned early that I had 2 choices: perform or disappear. My mother didn't like mess, and that included emotional mess. If Ashley cried, Mom swept her into her arms, promising ice cream or a trip to the park. If I cried, she stiffened and looked toward the door as though checking whether the neighbors could hear. "Caroline, not now," she'd say. "We don't need dramatics." Dad tried to counterbalance things, but he was often tired working double shifts or weekend jobs after his illness started draining the family finances. I think he saw the imbalance, but he was trying so hard just to keep the roof over us that he didn't always see everything under it. When he was around, things felt softer, kinder, like the volume dial on Mom's perfectionism had been turned down a notch. But after he died, that dial broke clean off. Ashley became the sun in my mother's universe, and I became the satellite she forgot existed, unless I drifted too close. If Ashley had a recital, Mom brought flowers. If Ashley had a science project, Mom made a poster board masterpiece. If I brought home a report card full of A's, Mom would glance at it while stirring a pot on the stove. "That's good," she'd say. "Maybe next term you'll take on more responsibility." I never understood what more responsibility meant. I was the kid who did her homework at the kitchen table without anyone reminding her who cleaned her room when she was told who watched Ashley on the weekends so my mom could run errands. But somehow, it was never enough. My efforts always slid off her like water off glass. By middle school, I'd learned to read her face the same way other kids learned to read textbooks. The pinch at the corner of her eyes meant she'd found something about me to correct. The tight smile meant she was about to compare me to Ashley. The sigh. God, the sigh was her signature, the sound she used to express disappointment without saying a word. And the funny thing is, I kept trying anyway. I studied harder. I joined clubs I didn't even like. I learned to slip into the background to avoid the sharp tone in her voice. I tried to be helpful, polite, predictable, anything that felt like the opposite of a burden. But no matter how careful I was, no matter how small I made myself, I was always the one who should have known better. Meanwhile, Ashley could do no wrong. If she overspent her allowance, Mom quietly transferred money. If she broke a rule, Mom smoothed the edges until it looked like a misunderstanding. There's a moment I'll never forget, my junior year of high school, when Ashley crashed our dad's old truck into a neighbor's fence because she'd borrowed it without asking. I remember Mom pacing the kitchen, frantic, wringing her hands. "She's overwhelmed," she kept saying. "She's been under so much pressure." Ashley was 14. When I got a B on a math test the same week, Mom folded her arms and said, "Caroline, at your age, you should be setting a better example." That was the moment I stopped expecting fairness. By the time Ashley and I reached adulthood, the roles were cemented. She was the sparkling success story, and I was the dependable placeholder who kept the peace. It didn't matter that I paid my bills on time, worked a stable job, and kept my life together without anyone bailing me out. My mother had already decided who we each were, and nothing I did could shake her belief. And the worst part, I internalized it. I became the woman who apologized when other people made mistakes, the coworker who stayed late without being asked, the girlfriend who didn't speak up when something hurt her, the daughter who kept attending holiday dinners just to eat cold turkey in a room where no one asked about her life. I learned not to raise my voice or my expectations. I became fluent in silence. So when my credit card got declined that day in the grocery store, that same silence washed over me. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't even cry until later in my car. I just nodded politely at the cashier, collected my things, and walked outside like nothing had happened. That's what decades of conditioning does. It teaches you to absorb the blow before you even register the pain. But something in me shifted when I confronted Ashley and Trent in that kitchen. The way Ashley shrugged like she'd borrowed my pair of shoes without asking. The way Trent smirked as if my financial identity was fair game simply because they wanted it. The casual entitlement, the complete lack of remorse, it all cracked open a part of me I'd kept sealed for years. And what poured out was anger. Not loud, not dramatic, not uncontrollable, just a steady burn, low and hot, and impossible to ignore. I left their house without slamming the door. I drove away without speeding or shaking. But something fundamental inside me was no longer quiet. Something that had been buried under decades of being overlooked had finally clawed its way to the surface. It was the first time I saw the mistreatment not as a series of isolated incidents, but as a pattern, one I'd been conditioned to accept since that Christmas photo when I was 8. And once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. Looking back, it's almost strange how quickly things unraveled. One declined card, one confrontation, one more disappointed look from my mother when I told her something was very wrong. She didn't gasp or panic or ask if I was okay. She barely looked up. "I told you," she said, voice flat. "You complicate everything, Caroline." But it was the next moment, the moment she folded her napkin, set it on the table, and added, "Maybe this is a sign you need to take more responsibility that broke something fragile inside me. Not because of the words, but because for the first time in my life, they didn't land the way they used to. They didn't sink in and become part of me. They just hung in the air like smoke. And smoke only means one thing. There's a fire somewhere. I didn't know it yet, but that fire was already burning through the lies my family had lived behind for decades. It was pushing its way toward the surface, toward the truth. And it was about to expose everything, every betrayal, every manipulation, every secret tied to the night I'd been too young to understand. Something was coming, and this time I wasn't going to disappear. The email popped open with a quiet click, but the moment I saw the subject line, "Account Activity Confirmation," my stomach lurched. It wasn't an account I recognized. The screen showed a balance I had never touched and a payment made from a card I didn't own. My cursor shook as I scrolled, and then the truth hit me like a fist. The account was registered under my name, linked to an address that wasn't mine. My pulse hammered as I clicked deeper. Screenshots opened. Statements, credit applications, a digital signature that looked exactly like mine, but wasn't. And then one more window unfolded, a completed application filed a month earlier, and the authorized user listed at the bottom made my vision blur. Ashley Reed. For a moment, the room around me disappeared. Nothing but the glow of the laptop screen, the frantic thud of my own heartbeat, and the dread sinking cold into my bones. I don't remember standing up. I only remember the sound of my chair scraping back sharp and unforgiving, as if the whole room recoiled with me. It's strange how quickly a single discovery can strip away years of denial. As I stared at those documents, something inside me finally cracked open, not with confusion this time, but with clarity as bright and merciless as a spotlight. The shock settled in slowly like cold water, creeping under a closed door, filling every corner of my chest, before I could even name what I was feeling. At first I told myself it had to be a mistake, a glitch, a typo, anything except what it was clearly showing me, anything except the truth I had been avoiding for years. But the more I clicked, the more undeniable it became. There were 6 accounts tied to my identity. 6. 4 credit cards, 1 personal loan, and a store account that had been opened just days after my birthday. Each one bore my name, my social security number, my address, except the address wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to Ashley and Trent, their new spacious 2-story home with the white porch and the neatly trimmed hedges, a house I'd helped paint one summer when Ashley wanted to save money. Now I knew what the real savings were for. I followed every breadcrumb the statements offered. Luxury purchases Ashley had always shrugged off as perks of her job, restaurant bills that matched the places she bragged about on social media, installments for furniture pieces she posted on her home decor account. All of it connected to me, to a version of me they had quietly created behind my back. The betrayal simmered in my chest, a slow, rising heat. Not a scream, not yet. Just heat. When I reached the bottom of one statement, I saw something that made me sink into the chair as if my legs couldn't hold me anymore. There was a note in the comments section, a short message typed automatically when a user updated an account primary under review due to inconsistent financial activity. Inconsistent financial activity. Of course, because I hadn't made any of it. I leaned back, hands trembling, staring at the ceiling as if I might find answers there. And then I remembered the other night, the night at my mother's table, her voice cutting through the air like a cold knife. "Caroline, you complicate everything." I had thought she meant the paperwork, or the stress, or that I was simply bothering her. But now, looking at the magnitude of what Ashley and Trent had done, I saw the truth hiding behind her words. She knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to decide the problem wasn't the theft, it was me noticing it. My throat tightened. I stood up again because sitting still felt impossible. I paced the living room, the carpet muffling my steps, the walls closing in with every revelation. I thought about all the times Ashley had brushed off my concerns about strange mail, the times Trent joked about my bad luck with finances, the time Mom sighed when I asked for help understanding a strange bill and said Ashley and Trent are very busy right now. Don't make your issues theirs. Issues. She'd meant my stolen life. At some point, I realized I had stopped pacing. I was standing in front of my file cabinet, fingers poised on the handle. A voice in my head whispered that I shouldn't open it. Another voice, quieter, older, worn down by years of being dismissed, told me I had to. Inside were the documents my father left behind. Old tax papers, house records, the remaining paperwork from his estate. I flipped through them without knowing exactly what I was looking for. But something told me there was more. Something buried beneath the surface, just like everything else in my family. When I reached the final folder, my heart stuttered. A photocopy of an old notarized form, a power of attorney agreement from years ago. Not mine, not my mother's. My father's signature shaky from his illness, but unmistakable, appointing someone to manage certain matters if his condition worsened. The designated name stopped my breath. Secondary Ashley Reed. Not me, not his eldest daughter. The one who handled his medications, scheduled his appointments, sat with him through long nights when he couldn't sleep. He had named Ashley. Why? The question echoed painfully. Why her? Why always her? I sank onto the edge of the couch, the folder slipping from my hands and scattering papers across the floor. My breathing became shallow as the pieces fell together in my mind one after another, like dominoes knocking each other down. This wasn't the first time Ashley had accessed personal information. It wasn't even the second. It had been happening for years, maybe as far back as Dad's illness, maybe even earlier. And Mom wasn't just turning a blind eye. She was helping. Whether out of convenience, fear, or simple favoritism, it didn't matter anymore. The truth was unmistakable. My life had been slipping out of my hands long before that declined card, long before the confrontation in Ashley's kitchen. The betrayal had roots, deep ones. Suddenly the memories didn't seem random. The missing mail I thought I'd misplaced, the odd insurance notice Mom dismissed as an error, the credit inquiry I ignored because the bank said it wasn't significant, the whispered conversation between Mom and Ashley I overheard once about keeping things simple and not overwhelming Caroline with details. It hadn't been about protecting me. It had been about controlling me. And now that control had cost me everything. My chest tightened as I crouched on the floor gathering the scattered papers. Each sheet felt heavier than the one before, as if they carried not just ink and words, but years of deception. Years of being pushed aside, talked over, treated like a shadow in my own family. But beneath the grief, beneath the confusion, another feeling began to form. Resolve. For the first time in my life, the scales were tipping. Not towards self-blame, not towards silence, but towards something much sharper, something steadier. I realized that I had been walking through my entire life blindfolded, trusting people who had proven again and again that they valued convenience over honesty, secrets over truth, and Ashley over me. The worst part wasn't that they betrayed me. It was that they expected me to stay quiet about it. They expected the same Caroline who swallowed her pain, who made herself small, who smiled even when she felt invisible. But that version of me was slipping away with every document I read, because now I saw the pattern, the lies, the manipulation. And once you see it, it changes you. When I finally stood up, I felt taller than I had just moments before. My hands were steady, my breath even. I closed the laptop, gathered every document, and placed them in a single stack on the coffee table. I knew what I had to do next. Not out of anger, though. The anger burned steady and hot, but out of necessity, out of self-respect, out of sheer survival. I grabbed my keys, my coat, and the folder with the documents. My voice was calm when I said aloud to no one but myself, "This ends tonight." And with that, I walked out the door, ready to face the truth, no matter what waited for me on the other side. Ashley was mid-sentence when I finally stood up from the dining table, the folder in my hand snapping open like a crack of thunder. Silverware clattered. Conversation stopped. Every chair froze. The overhead light cast a hard glow across the documents as I held them high enough for everyone to see. My voice didn't shake. "Ashley," I said, each word steady as stone, "would you like to explain why your name is listed as an authorized user on an account opened under mine?" She went pale. Trent's wine glass slipped from his hand and hit the floor, red spilling across the hardwood. My mother's fork hovered in midair, her eyes widening as I laid the first page on the table, then another, and another, statements, applications, signatures, each one louder than any words I could have spoken. Ashley reached for one of the pages, but I pulled it back before she could touch it. "No," I said. "Not this time." The room seemed to shrink around us. Someone's chair creaked. Someone else stopped breathing. And then slowly, every face turned toward the three people who had assumed I'd always stay quiet. What none of them knew what they were about to learn was that this was only the beginning, and that there was something far worse than stolen credit waiting underneath it all. I hadn't planned to do this at dinner. I hadn't imagined this moment would involve a perfectly set table, my mother's expensive dishes, or Ashley chattering about her real estate victories, while Trent bragged about some renovation he didn't even complete himself. Yet here we were, my whole fractured family arranged like an audience waiting for the curtain to rise. The truth is, I didn't choose the timing. The timing chose me. Earlier that afternoon, after finding the documents and realizing just how deeply the betrayal went, something inside me shifted into place. All the years of shrinking back, staying quiet, smoothing things over it all, fell away like shed skin. I gathered the papers, organized them, and slipped them into an old leather folder Dad used to keep his tax records in. It felt fitting to bring a piece of him with me. I drove to my mother's house without calling first. That alone was unusual enough to raise suspicion. She hated unannounced visits. But when she opened the door wearing a smile that froze the second she saw the folder in my hand, I knew the moment had arrived. "Dinner was my mother's idea. You might as well stay," she'd said, voice brittle. "Ashley and Trent are stopping by." Perfect, I thought. I sat through appetizers in silence. I listened as Ashley complained that work had been a nightmare and how people didn't understand how hard managing finances can be. My mother nodded sympathetically, offering her the kind of empathy she'd never extended to me. Trent laughed loudly at his own jokes. Ashley twirled her hair. My mother's perfume hung heavy in the air, and then dessert arrived warm and sweet and utterly suffocating. That's when I stood. That's when I opened Dad's folder. That's when everything changed. The silence that followed felt alive, thick, breathing. Ashley blinked rapidly, her voice a thin thread. "What is this supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, sliding one of the statements toward her, "that for the last several months you've been using accounts opened under my name. It means you've been spending money, my credit, my identity, like it belonged to you." Trent leaned forward. "Caroline, calm down. This is obviously—" I turned to him. "Your handwriting is on page 4. His mouth snapped shut. My mother's eyes darted between us, her facade crumbling. "Caroline, you're blowing this out of proportion." I laid another sheet down, the sound sharp against the table. "I'm not done." Every head snapped upward. I flipped to the application with the forged digital signature, the signature that matched mine perfectly. Too perfectly. "Mom," I said quietly, "this signature was uploaded from your home computer." Her face drained of color. That must be a mistake." "It's not." Her hand trembled around her napkin. She didn't put it down. She didn't blink. That alone told me everything. Ashley pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loudly. "Caroline, why are you attacking me? What do you want?" "Money. An apology." My laugh was bitter and low. "I want the truth. I didn't do anything wrong. You stole my identity. I was going to fix it." "You weren't supposed to touch it in the first place." Trent slammed his fist on the table. "This is ridiculous. You're overreacting." I turned to him slowly. "Tell me, Trent," I said, "how exactly did you know the security question to my bank account? The one only Dad and I knew." His jaw tightened. Ashley looked at him confused. Wait. What? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The whole room saw it. The lie landed between us like a dropped weapon, sharp enough to cut through the last thin threads of denial. But that wasn't the twist. Not yet. I reached into the folder and pulled out one last document, one I had found tucked behind Dad's old papers. I hadn't expected to find it. I didn't even know he had kept it. But it was the key. I placed it gently on the table. A letter from my father's attorney, unopened, dated 2 months before he passed. Ashley frowned. What is that? I slid it toward my mother. You tell us. She stared stone still. Her fingers twitched once, then twice before she finally picked it up. As she read, her shoulders slumped. Her chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. What is it? Ashley demanded, irritation turning to unease. When Mom didn't answer, I spoke instead. It's Dad's request to modify his estate plan, I said softly. He wanted to add me as joint beneficiary. Ashley's head snapped toward me, eyes wide. What he asked for half of his remaining savings to go to me. Not to you, not to Mom, to me. That's impossible, Ashley whispered. And do you see this box checked here? I asked, tapping the letter. The one marked request reviewed and denied due to prior instruction by secondary agent. The secondary agent Dad listed years ago. Ashley swallowed. Your name is right there. She looked down, stunned, finally seeing it in print. Trent muttered a curse under his breath. My mother pressed her hand over her mouth. Ashley's voice trembled. I don't remember this. You don't remember. My voice was calm, quieter than it had any right to be. You don't remember receiving a letter saying Dad wanted to give me half. You don't remember denying his request. You don't remember hiding this from both of us. Her breath hitched. Caroline, I was overwhelmed. You stole money meant for me. I said the words clear, unwavering. Money Dad wanted me to have. Money he tried to leave me. Ashley shook her head violently. No, I didn't. Mom, tell her? My mother's face crumpled. Ashley, she whispered. You told me you'd taken care of it. You said the attorney said it was too complicated. Ashley stared at her, horrified. You lied to me, Mom whispered. There it was. The crack. The twist. The truth none of them had ever expected would come into the light. Ashley had not only stolen my identity, she had stolen my inheritance. She had denied our dying father's final request and then buried the evidence. And now, with the document lying naked on the table, there was no place left for her to hide. Trent stood abruptly, hands raised. Ashley, what did you do? She looked between him, Mom and me, her chest rising in shallow, frantic breaths. I didn't think it mattered. You didn't think my father's wishes mattered, I said quietly. She shook her head so hard her hair whipped across her face. He was confused. He was sick. He didn't know what he wanted. I was protecting Mom. I was protecting all of us. No, I said. You were protecting yourself. The room fell into a silence so deep I could hear the ticking of the dining room clock, a slow, merciless beat, tick, tick, tick. Then my mother stood unsteady, trembling. Ashley, she whispered, how could you? Ashley reached for her, but Mom stepped back as though the touch burned. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being accused. I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the burden. The tide had finally turned. I gathered the documents one by one, slipping them back into the folder. No one spoke. No one moved. Ashley sat collapsed in her chair, face-blotched tears streaking her cheeks. Trent stood rigid, trapped between disbelief and dread. My mother looked shattered, staring at the table, as if seeing her family clearly for the first time. When the folder was closed, I straightened. This, I said softly, ends now. No yelling, no gloating, just truth. Cold, solid, undeniable. I stepped away from the table, walked toward the doorway, and paused just long enough to look back. Every eye was on me. Every face was changed, and for the first time I walked out not as the forgotten daughter, not as the scapegoat they'd built me into, but as someone they could no longer silence. The room stayed silent behind me, the air heavy with the wreckage of their own choices, as I closed the door and stepped into the night, heading toward the life waiting on the other side of the truth. The door clicked shut behind me, and the world went still in a way I hadn't felt in years. The night air was cool, steady, and quiet, so quiet, it felt like the house itself had stopped breathing. I walked down the front steps with the folder pressed to my chest, each footstep lighter than the last. There was no shouting behind me, no slammed doors, no one rushing to pull me back inside. For the first time since I was a little girl, I wasn't the one standing in the ruins of someone else's chaos. I was simply walking away carrying only the truth and my own name. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The farther I moved from that house, the more I felt something in my chest loosen, as though a knot that had been pulling tight for decades had finally let go. In the days that followed, the quiet lingered not empty but clean, like a room after a storm. It gave me space to breathe, and little by little I began to understand what that moment at the dining table had taken from me, and what it had given back. The legal process started sooner than I expected. The financial investigator I'd contacted earlier in the week reviewed the documents I brought and didn't mince words. "You've been taken advantage of for a long time," he said, sliding the pages back toward me with a gentle firmness. "But you're not powerless. Not anymore." Step by step, I reclaimed every piece of what had been stolen. The fraudulent accounts were closed. My credit began to recover. And when Dad's attorney confirmed that the letter Ashley hid was valid and enforceable, I became the legal recipient of the portion my father had meant for me all along. Signing those forms acknowledging that something intended for me was finally returning felt like stepping into sunlight after years in the shade. With the inheritance came the chance to choose a home of my own, not a rental on borrowed stability, not a temporary place where I slept with my phone in hand just in case, but a small, bright condo on the edge of the city. Nothing extravagant, but undeniably mine. The first day I walked in with my own key, I opened every window and let the air sweep through the rooms. I could smell fresh paint and new beginnings. I spent hours cleaning, sanding, repainting, filling the silence with soft music instead of anxious thoughts. My hands knew what to do, restore what was mine, piece by piece. One afternoon, while repainting the kitchen cabinets a warm shade of cream, I caught myself smiling at the simple rhythm of it. The steady brush strokes, the sound of bristles sliding across wood. It felt like stitching something torn back together. Not perfectly, but honestly. And honest was enough. I kept my distance from my mother and Ashley, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. My mother called twice, each time sounding smaller, her voice brittle and strained. I let the calls go to voicemail. There were no insults now, no sharp comments, only questions she wasn't ready to ask out loud. "Are you okay?" she whispered once. "Can we talk?" I sat with the weight of those words for a long time, knowing they came from fear, not healing. Eventually, I sent her a short text. "I'm safe. I'm rebuilding. I need time." It wasn't anger. It was a boundary. A door left partially open but no longer wide enough for old habits to walk through. Ashley didn't contact me at all. The silence between us felt like the closing of a chapter I'd been rereading out of obligation, not love. I didn't return to that chapter. I didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, I found unexpected support in places I'd never anticipated. A coworker I'd always exchanged polite small talk with brought me a houseplant as a new place, new start gift. A neighbor 2 doors down introduced herself with a plate of lemon bars and an easy smile, saying she'd noticed me painting and wondered if I needed an extra ladder. And one Saturday morning, my supervisor at the design firm offered extra hours and a small renovation project that needed someone with your eye for detail. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was quieter than that steady, warm moments that reminded me I wasn't rebuilding alone. I began taking long evening walks, something I'd never given myself time for before. I mapped out new routes through the neighborhood, letting the world unfold at a calmer pace. On one of those walks, I passed a community garden tucked behind a row of townhomes. I stopped, drawn to the sight of raised beds and early spring green poking through the soil. A volunteer waved me in, and before I knew it, I'd signed up for a small plot. The first day I turned the soil, the earth crumbling gently in my hands, it felt like a declaration. A quiet promise that I was planting the life I wanted to live, not the one I'd been assigned. The more I settled into myself, the more I understood how deeply the old patterns had shaped me. For years I had been the daughter trying to earn her place, the sister hoping to be seen, the woman shrinking herself to avoid the sharpness of others' disappointment. But standing on my balcony one evening, the sunset brushing gold across the horizon, I felt something new take root. I wasn't waiting to be chosen anymore. I was choosing myself. The condo slowly filled with pieces of my life that reflected who I was becoming. A bookshelf stocked with design journals and novels I'd always meant to read. A small desk by the window where I sketched ideas for potential renovation clients. A soft throw blanket I bought simply because I liked the color. I didn't need to justify anything to anyone. One afternoon, while placing the last of my framed photos on a shelf, most of them of landscapes, places I hoped to visit one day, I found a picture of Dad tucked between two old notebooks. His smile was warm, gentle, steady. The same smile I'd sought in every room after he passed. I placed his picture in the living room not out of grief, but gratitude. He had tried to leave something for me, a truth my sister buried, but couldn't erase. And now in this quiet space I'd built piece by piece, I could finally honor what he saw in me. On the morning I planted my first few seedlings in the garden plot, the weather was crisp, the ground soft, the sky wide and forgiving. As I knelt and pressed the small roots into the earth, a soft breeze moved past, lifting the hair at my temples. For a moment, I just breathed deep, steady, unburdened. Life had broken open in ways I never asked for. But it was mine to rebuild, and I was doing it with both hands. I stood, brushed the soil from my palms, and looked at the small beginnings in front of me. Nothing dramatic, nothing grand, just quiet, honest growth. The kind that lasts. And I understood then that healing isn't a single moment. It's a series of choices, small brave ones, to step toward the life waiting for you instead of the one that kept you small. As I walked home, keys warm in my hand, sunlight stretching across the pavement, I felt the truth settle into place, clear, simple, unshakable. Sometimes the greatest freedom comes not from being welcomed back, but from finally deciding where you truly belong.